we have on our website, again, arts.gov/research. If you click on research reports, you will see the research reports you've just seen, the full reports, and I urge you to take a look at them. But we also see, if you click on research notes on the NEA website, you will see a document that attempts to distill the key findings from all of these studies and goes into them in some detail. So that research note, if you see there on the bottom of the screen, it indicates what the title of the note is. But these were three of the findings that NEA, looking at all the data we got through our investigators, or intrepid investigators, I was going to say, managed to pull together. So the first finding is that long-term declines in childhood arts education have serious implications for the future of arts participation in America. That's a fairly bald statement, but it really is supported by a lot of, as you see, trend data from Nick Rapkin and Nisi Hedberg. It also does get into the linkages between arts education and other forms of participation. And finally, this report, that first finding also gets into, if you go into the report, the highly disproportionate amount of the decline that's borne by minority non-white groups and the implications of that for socioeconomic status and other variables. The next finding that again, I'm kind of doing a real quick synopsis here, but Mark Stern's report really has taught us that age is a poor predictor of arts participation habits, and we really have to look elsewhere, perhaps for other culprits. And as he showed, that the majority of the decline in terms of total number of attendances, if you just look at attendance, 82%, I believe, of that decline was borne by the shift in what's called the omnivore population, those people who participate in multiple types of art forms of different genres and do so repeatedly. That population, subpopulation, has decreased over time, particularly between 2002 and 2008, which accounts for the very sharp decline in attendance rates. Thirdly, as you just saw from Jennifer and Alan, a more comprehensive picture of arts engagement, one not focused exclusively on live arts attendance, yields a narrative that is different from prior NEA reports about U.S. adult participation in the arts. I have to stress here that all of the researchers, including those that I cited at the very outset, who provided us with data for the 2008 report about the full SPPA results, worked long and hard and put in a lot of independent effort into validating the data and making sure that we could report accurately to the public. But what we're seeing is that with further levels of analysis, we're emerging with a much more complicated picture, and one that I think, frankly, is more liberating to arts practitioners as well as researchers about the potential for arts and culture in America. And so we hope to use the findings from all these studies to come up with a better way to capture arts participation going forward. Just to take one top-line finding, again, from Jennifer and Alan, it's basically that 3 out of 4 American adults did some form of arts activity in 2008. That's 75% of all Americans, adults, who did some form of arts activity. Quite a different number when ranged against the 34% or so who attended a live arts event, which was formerly the metric we used. So I think we need to think along those lines. And of course that percentage, actually that percentage does not include people reading literature, which is yet another form of arts participation. So we'll go from there and we'll open it up to general questions. Again, you can see those results on the NEA website. But let's take some general questions now. One question for all of the authors, and we can go in order, I suppose, is, let me find it here. Sorry, just a moment. Oh, what do you, the authors, think are opportunities for strategic investment given your research? That's maybe a long question. That might require long answers, but maybe we can keep them short. Mark, we'll go with you first. What do you think are opportunities for strategic investment given your research?
Well, it's tough to say when you have a non-finding, to say what the implications of those are. I mean, I think in a certain way I defer to Alan and Jennifer on this issue. I mean, I think what comes across to me from this is the fact that the role of social structural variables doesn't really work. Now, I will say, in terms of other research I've done, one of the things that is missing in terms of explaining patterns of arts participation that I think is very useful and that other people have alluded to is the role of neighborhood effects, the kinds of areas people live in. For example, the concentration of arts assets within a neighborhood, which in other research we've done has shown to be a very powerful explanatory variable in terms of explaining patterns. And I do think that's an area where, you know, I think it's one thing that we can't get out of the SPPA, but that actually is an important way of thinking and explaining what's going on in terms of arts.
Alan, do you have a comment?
Well, I would just add, yeah, would you just quickly rephrase the question?
Sure, sure. So it's a pretty big question, but I think you've spoken a little bit to it. What do you think are opportunities for strategic investment given your research?
Sure. Well, I think there are levers. I think in terms of what are the levers for increasing participation. And I keep coming back to setting and venue, because I think where people do arts activities or where arts activities are offered has a great deal to do with who does them. And so I hope we can explore this more in future research. In some of the studies I've been involved with, I've seen the prevalence of the home as a venue for creative activity. And I don't know too many arts groups that create programming for the home, for example. Right. And I think, you know, as Mark said, that, you know, where people live, you know, has a huge effect on their participation, and some people kind of define their cultural space as their neighborhood, others, you know, a larger geography, and I think that varies a great deal by cultural background. So anyway, I think this study, this monograph, really raises serious questions about what parts of the cultural ecology need to be supported in order to grow audiences for the future. But that's not the only outcome of arts participation.
Exactly, right.
I think what we're finding out is that the intrinsic outcomes of making art and being creative are inherently worthwhile and worth investing in, regardless of whether someone buys a ticket to, you know, a professional presentation. And I think that's the competing value system that we need to debate vigorously in this country.
Okay, thank you. And Nick, just do you mind addressing strategic investments?
Sure. I would begin, I think, with a caution that though it appears that there is a very powerful relationship between arts education and arts participation, not just in terms of attendance, but also in terms of performance and creation. That despite that strong relationship, we shouldn't expect a one-to-one relationship between additional investment in arts education and down the line participation. The relationships are not proximate, they're distal, they're far apart, and I think they're rather unpredictable. Nonetheless, I would say that investment in arts education is strategically absolutely essential, and that we should approach those investments with an eye toward how the arts contribute to deepening and enriching education in general, as opposed to self-interest in adding numbers to future arts participation.
Great. And can you actually either Jennifer or Alan, can you elaborate a little bit on the role of different racial ethnic groups that you saw related to specific art forms or in terms of participation in certain types of venues or other things that are captured through the SPPA? There is a question about whether in fact how do you view the multi-mode sort of framework in relation to racial ethnic groups or other specific demographic groups?
Sure, I'll address that. Looking at the typical benchmark arts events, I want to speak very generally here, but it tends to be what we talk about in terms of, white, predominantly white, well-educated, higher income individuals. When you think more broadly, the demographics become a little more dispersed. And it is interesting to see that the role in which community venues play and the attendance rates of non-whites within the community roles. Very much we see that self-reported African Americans are highly active or are likely to attend in their churches or places of worship. There is one venue question that asks about that, as well as also have some of the highest rates who would be being very active in choirs and in choral groups. So there are differences when you take a broader perspective of what the arts activities are. You're more inclusive as to who, defined demographically, is participating. And I'd also just want to say, in terms of access to the arts, considering electronic media, Hispanics, and we also look at citizenship, non-citizens, report some of the highest rates and the highest usage of broadcasts and recordings. So it's very much we need to think about who is able to access art through different means and to be more inclusive and more equitable perhaps in funding these different mechanisms so we're more equitable in terms of funding support and who it reaches demographically.
Great. And I have a question. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Mark,
well, I just wanted to say we actually collaborated with Alan Brown on a study here in Philadelphia of various
you have a mafia.
forms of
You have a
art.
mafia going there. You have an arts mafia, research mafia. Go ahead.
And the one thing that came out in terms of immigrants who were in the survey was the fact that they're very engaged in arts and culture and all sorts of venues, except for kind of standard nonprofit organizations. This was an area where they were, by and large, missing, even though their overall rates were quite high. So it supports both Alan and Jennifer's point on this.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mark. Another question I have is this is something that a couple of people have raised in different ways, so I'll try to synthesize their questions. And for you, Nick, I mean, can you just I guess I'll make it a different question in a sense. Can you amplify what you meant by this is not unidirectional, the link between arts participation or arts education? There are a couple of questions kind of pushing at, is this a causal relationship? Are we going overboard by saying there's this really strong link between the two variables? Do you have any comments on that?
Well, but in terms of statistical analysis, we can see that there is real strength, greater strength between arts education and adult arts participation than any of the other variables that are measured in the SPPAs. But cause and effect in social behaviors like attending the arts are enormously complicated. And we're talking in the case, for example, of childhood arts education of perhaps many years between the event, the educational event, and the attendance event. So saying with absolute certainty that a childhood event caused an adult behavior strikes me as kind of preposterous in this rather complicated world that we live in. And by bidirectional, what I mean is that as we see attendance rates going down, it strikes me that one way to interpret attendance rates going down is that people are finding less meaning and value in the arts, perhaps only in arts attendance, but if we generalize, the people are seeing less meaning and value in the arts. And if people are seeing less meaning and value in the arts, perhaps they come to the conclusion that the arts don't have much meaning or value for education either. In other words, the beliefs that people have about the arts impinge on policy decisions about arts education.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Before I sort of go to one more question, I just want to point out a couple of things. Venues has come up a lot in this discussion, and as I think was made clear, we only have a few limited cases where we ask about arts participation through specific venues in the SPPA surveys. We are moving to correct that and get a broader gamut of types of venues people attend or attend, to use that loosely, to participate in various arts events. I will say also that just administratively, the NEA has made an effort to collect data now from our grantees, getting down to the project activity location, down to the census tract level. So we're hoping to have a lot more administrative data as well as research data to help to share with the public once we conduct some analyses. Moving to a question here specifically about venue, it is someone's asking if neighborhood arts infrastructure is a strong predictor of arts participation, which was, I think, something that was posited, although it wasn't studied. How does the historic move of people to the suburbs where fewer neighborhoods have existing arts infrastructure affect arts participation? I'm going to ask Mark maybe to say something on that, if you have any thoughts on that, and maybe we can ask Alan and Jennifer too. How does the historic move of people to the suburbs where fewer neighborhoods have existing arts infrastructure affect arts participation?
Well, it's interesting because, again, in Philadelphia, where we're able to use information about the concentration of different kinds of art assets in a person's neighborhood. In the suburbs, it makes a huge difference as well. I mean, not all suburbs are the same. Certainly, if we go to the outer fringe, kind of the exurban fringe, there really, at this point, aren't a lot of cultural institutions or assets, and they certainly do have lower rates. But there are a lot of suburbs in the Philadelphia metro area that actually do have significant concentrations of nonprofit arts organizations, commercial cultural firms, and those neighborhoods are more likely to have higher rates of participation as well.
Anyone want to add to that?
Sure, I will. The question is sort of made me revisit in my mind the hundreds of customer data files I've mapped over the years of arts groups, and the sort of consistent finding that at about 30 miles, the rates of participation fall off in terms of, people to stop driving with frequency to a central venue. So I think as the population kind of diffuses, it gets increasingly difficult for arts groups that use central venues, and particularly in large urban areas, to reach. So the irony is that they have to go out into those communities if they want to reach those people. But the larger implication, I think, is one of a decentralized approach to asset development, particularly facilities and programs that allow people who do live in suburban and exurban areas to access the art.
Thank you, Alan. Somebody has pointed out in submitting a question, a comment really, that points this person's contention is the move to the suburbs was pretty complete before the SPPA even started. That would have been pre-1982. Since the SPPA started, there has been, if anything, more centralization. We'll leave that without addressing it through comments because there are other questions, but that's the viewpoint of somebody listening in. There's a question about, I think maybe this relates again to you both, Jennifer and Alan, because I know you both referred to demographics really playing a relatively minor role or smaller role on arts participation habits than certain behaviors and choices. But one question is, how was demographic defined and used in the study? I think, just to be clear, we didn't use a set definition of the term demographics. We're looking at various demographic factors. But do you have any comments on, Jennifer, what you meant by demographics?
Sure. The demographics that we include in the analysis are gender, race, ethnicity cohorts, age, educational attainment, family income, and citizenship status. And for some of the analyses, we're able to drill down a little bit further, and we use marital status, whether or not the individual has children under 18, and whether or not they reside in the metropolitan area.
Thank you, Jennifer. We'll still take a couple more questions, I believe. I just want to let you know again, one of the questions is maybe a catch-up question because it's asking, what are the implications again? Which I can understand, having heard a lot of information. Everybody has a different take, but I think if you go again to the research note or even the research reports themselves, they each try to set them forward in the executive summaries. And so that's there. Sorry. Okay. So now we have a question or a comment. Maybe going to highbrow arts events are not valued as much because they are no longer so important for social standing. We at the NEA haven't used that term highbrow or lowbrow so much to characterize the art forms, but I know that Mark, in his studies referring to the work of Dr. Peterson, have looked into this. Do you want to, Mark, comment on this? I think this is really what you've been saying all along, that perhaps arts attendance for specific kinds of events is not so much a social standing issue these days as much as it used to be. Mark?
Yeah, well, yeah, I definitely think that's true. But it's, I mean, in terms of what's been going on recently, it's really this omnivore population that historically we thought of as kind of hip and cool, that went to all sorts of stuff. It's kind of their relative decline that sort of is a big question mark for me.
Thank you. And one of the things that was also asked is, yes, I think we're pretty much done. There's one question that, sorry for my stumbling here, I'm just going through this list. Okay. I think that's actually covered. Oh, there is a good question that I also wanted to get answered, if we can. Has film either attendance or creation of film, which could be construed as broadcast of theater, for example, has this been taken into consideration anywhere in any of your studies? I can explain this, but I'd rather hear from you all if you thought of that as a conscious part of your study, or if you were stymied in looking at that variable, film attendance or creation. Any comments on that? I think they're looking for me to. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the SPPA does include a question about the creation of film. What that definition of film is open, and I think Sunil can speak to kind of drilling down into that a little further with some of the revisions being made to the SPPA. So attendance at film is a little looser and is not directly included in the analysis in our monograph.
That's correct, Jennifer, and we are, I mean, you're right that we're looking at that variable. I mean, that was an activity that, of course, we wanted to track for a long time, and for a while there had been a fussiness, I suppose, about we didn't really want to include all films, so we want to get at arts-related, if that makes sense, filmmaking or film going, and we realized very rapidly that it's very hard to do that, and so we did ultimately find a way to do that in 2012. And that survey is still in development, but we'll, again, we hope to share that with you later. Yes?
May I just briefly speak to that question?
Yes, Alan.
About film, the importance of film in American culture, and the standard for theater going, and particularly comfort of seating, and the ability to eat in a theater, very much influences, I think, the expectations that people have for going into other kinds of venues. And I'd just like to say that the kinds of arts programming that are going into cinemas now that is very significant, and it's blurring the line between film, film attendance and drama, because you're seeing often seeing a live opera or a live theater performance at a cinema, and the real question is, what are you watching, a movie or a performance? But I think the recontextualization of live arts participation into cinemas is potentially one of the biggest shifts we're seeing. And I worry a lot about, 10 years from now, if millions of Americans will be going to see the arts in their local cinema and not frequenting live venues because they find it so accessible. So I think it's a great question and a really rich discussion for future research.
Right, and another thing, just somebody's asked about, do we get into the costs of attending events? We do not with the survey. We are actually looking at improving the survey to get at whether an event was free or not in terms of attendance. So I'll try to, that should take care of that answer for now, for that question. A couple more questions. There is this question which
I think it takes a little probing look at this idea we've been putting forward, all of us, in terms of this data about alternative venues, or looking at different ways people participate through other venues. The question is, well, it's a comment, and then in question it says, I feel like this thinking has been around forever. Does anyone have any research that shows the detriment of this thinking? For example, do older, moneyed, educated audiences decrease? I suppose they mean if we emphasize arts performances at non-traditional arts venues. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if anyone has any sense of the implications of venue choice in terms of the traditional work of arts organizations, in terms of those who have institutions and the halls and the cinema hall, the movie halls and the theaters and so forth.
We've done some research, Sunil, on that, and seen some generational shifts in terms of what kinds of venues and settings are valued, particularly among younger people valuing venues where more social interaction is possible. As just an example.
Right. I think there's one more question here. Someone's asking, how does this work? How does this inform a dialogue about supply and demand? It would seem to change the amount of supply and the amount of demand in question. Where does quality of experience come into consideration, especially as control of that quality slips away from the organization or creator? I'm going to do an unconventional thing and ask Nick to take a stab at this whole idea of supply and demand. I say unconventional because I would normally think, hey, Alan, but Nick, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you think of this is the context of supply and demand.
Well, it's a very interesting question, but I think you have to begin by asking, what do we mean by demand for the arts? And I actually think, of course, that Alan's work is important when we think about what we mean by demand for the arts. If we think about demand for the arts as simply demand for tickets or admission to a show at a museum, it's a fairly narrow way of thinking about what people are demanding. In effect, we're thinking in terms of their demand for what appears, in effect, to be a kind of high-end commodity. On the other hand, if we think in terms of people's need and demand for finding meaning and purpose, and value in their life, which I think is why people often turn to the arts, then it sort of changes. It changes the valence of the question, and it forces us to ask whether the containers in which we're offering people the arts, i.e., in the way that the SPPA's sort of approach this is, we're offering the benchmark events in those venues and from those institutions that people attend them at. Whether those containers are actually containing the stuff that people are looking for. Maybe there's no diminishment in people's demand for meaning in their life, but they're not finding it in those containers. Did I shut everyone up?
No, not at all. You've awed us with your wisdom. Let's go to Mark. Do you have any thoughts on this question about supply and demand? Mark? How about Alan or Jennifer?
Okay, I guess I feel that...
Mark.
I'm sorry. I guess I'm concerned that we've let issues around the economics of the arts, both supply and demand, lead our discussions about the overall role of the arts in American society. And I think if we flip that around and start with like what people care about in terms of issues around creativity, neighborhood engagement, involvement with other people, if we start with those concerns, I think we start asking different questions, and that the supply and demand issues don't seem as central.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. I'll give Jennifer or Alan a chance to respond.
Yeah, I think the dichotomy of supply and demand is uncomfortable for me, just because I see it's kind of an artificial. I see it as kind of an artificial barrier, and stemming, building on what Mark was saying, There's a lot more happening in terms of arts organizations are not just the supply, but they are the enablers of the demand, that they are not necessarily the gatekeepers to the supply of arts, but have the expertise and they know the creative possibilities of the arts and are able to help supply that and foster demand. So I think supply demand really restricts how we're able to view how arts organizations and communities engage with the arts, and would very much encourage people to move away from that. As Mark was saying, to really understand what's valuable from arts engagement and participation, and then understand what bridges can be built further. And perhaps it doesn't require some new ways of operations and engaging individuals, but that there's more fluidity there, and that I see arts organizations more as enablers, which is a term that the think tank Demos has used out of the UK quite a bit to describe some new strategies for how arts organizations work with their communities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for those comments. I'm going to actually conclude now, but let me just say a couple of things. One is that this dialogue is very fresh and vivid to us here at the NEA about how we conceptualize arts engagement and participation in this country, and realizing it isn't necessarily dichotomous, and there are many streams or ways people get their art or put their art out there. And we are trying to make these attempts to have future iterations of the survey collect data that can complement the work that's been collected for decades now, 3 or 4 decades. And I have to emphasize here, to do a little horn tooting of ourselves, or at least of the NEA's historic work in providing a foundation for collecting this data. The NEA and the U.S. Census Bureau together, again, have been partnering since 1982 on these surveys. And I think most people will agree that whatever the shortcomings of the survey instrument at this time, they remain a vital indicator, or collectively provide a vital indicator of how people engage in the arts. So we're learning as we go along, but I think we hope that the results from these 3 studies have shored up the results that we presented earlier on media participation and on arts participation through attendance in a way that paints a completer picture of how we all take part in the arts.